I want to welcome everyone here today. Special welcome to on behalf of Rabbi Englander, who's on the Zoom as well. We're very happy to be able to partner together, TBS and Bethel, for this very important program that we have today with Dr. Yizhar Hess, who we're going to meet and hear from in a little bit. And I also want to thank too Daniel Livingston, who works with Yizhar and helped put together the program from Israel too, and we're grateful for all of his work and his help as well. As good as it is to see everyone here today, and I want to thank you for being here for a conversation that I think none of us really want to have, but we know that we must have. As lovers and supporters of Israel, we are used to having to stand up to Israel in the face of external threats. And we are proud to support Israel in our communities by giving tzedakah, lobbying the US government, and by supporting many other projects. And we are all planning wonderful events in our community to celebrate Israel's 75th birthday in April, which is an important and incredible milestone to celebrate. But what is happening inside Israel today is deeply concerning, scary even, and is because we love and support Israel that we seek to better understand what's going on and to learn how we can help. Now, when Rabbi Englander and I talked about scheduling this call with Yizhar last week, on top of our agenda were the positions and the proposals taken up by Prime Minister Netanyahu's government with regards to the so-called judicial reform, relations with the Palestinians, and religious pluralism, like equal funding for the Masorti Movement and other non-Orthodox streams of Judaism, and also the discrimination we have faced at the Kotel when it comes to egalitarian prayer. And these issues were concerning enough. Hundreds of thousands are protesting in the streets and in front of the Knesset each week in opposition to this government's proposals. And then over the last 2 days, we mourned along with Israel and the families of Hallel Yaniv, Yagel Yaniv, and Ilan Ganeles, who were murdered by Palestinian terrorists. But then we were also appalled by the reaction by those Israelis who took the law into their own hands and stormed the Palestinian village of Havara, killing one, injuring many, and destroying homes and property. As President Herzog said in condemning this violence, this is not our way. He was right, but it can feel sometimes like Israel is losing its way as this situation continues to deteriorate. Now, there are those who might say that we who do not live in Israel shouldn't have any place in this debate about Israel. But I disagree with that. As Rabbi David Hartman once taught, Israel is too important to leave only to Israelis. Israel is the dream and the hope of the entire Jewish people, and what it does impacts and matters to all of us. And we all not only have a place, but a responsibility to lift our voices for the Israel we believe in, an Israel that fulfills its founding principles by being a Jewish and democratic state. Though this is not an easy conversation to have, it is an important one, which is why we have partnered together for it. And we are grateful to have Dr. Yizhar Hess with us to help explain it to us and help us understand our role as Chovevei Zion, as lovers and supporters of Israel. In a moment, I'm going to turn it over to Rabbi Englander, who's going to introduce Yizhar. If you have questions that you'd like to ask, we invite you to write them in the chat. Rabbi Englander and I will see them. We're going to do our best to get to all of the questions, but we apologize in advance if we're not able to. I'm also going to put in the chat a link from Yizhar that you can use to sign up for updates from him about what's happening through his role in the World Zionist Organization. And you're invited to click on that link and to continue that conversation. But we're grateful to have Yizhar with us. And now it's my pleasure to turn it over to my friend and my colleague, Rabbi Englander, to introduce our speaker today.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Peltz, and to the whole team at TBS for pulling together really important, and I'm sure what is going to be a special and informative program from which we will all benefit. It's my honor to introduce Yizhar to those who may not have previously had the pleasure of hearing and learning from him, although I would imagine in this group of well over 100 participants, some have had the privilege and pleasure of hearing from Dr. Hess before. He has visited dozens, if not hundreds, of North American congregations, and now via Zoom has been informing people in his unique and very, very special way. And it's no surprise that he comes to this with a broad and deep perspective, having served both in the IDF and passing the Israeli bar, and working in both advertising and journalism. He's a published author on subjects of great significance. But for our communities, Yizhar is probably best known for serving as the executive director of the Masorti Movement in Israel, which is part of the worldwide conservative movement. And Yizhar is one of the leading spokespeople on issues near and dear to our heart, which parallel the extraordinarily weighty and important issues to us that Rabbi Peltz so beautifully outlined just a moment ago. Yizhar has been involved at the highest levels of the Israeli government, negotiating, discussing, and teaching on the importance of religious pluralism in Israel. He currently is a member of the executive of the Jewish Agency, the Board of Trustees of Keren HaYesod, and the Board of Governors of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Not for nothing, he is also a 10th generation Yerushalmi, or Jerusalemite. And I can tell you from having had the privilege of hearing Dr. Hess teach in many different forums that we're lucky to have him here today. Again, I thank TBS, I thank everybody from Beth El who is on, anybody who may have made their way from elsewhere in our wonderful South Jersey community, even as I join you today from sunny South Florida. And Dr. Hess, assuming you are right here, we turn things over to you.
Okay, now I unmuted. Thank you so much, rabbis, Rabbi Englander, Rabbi Peltz, for the warm and kind introduction. I'm happy to be with you tonight. I'm here in Jerusalem, and we'll talk about Israel today. And before we start, I'd like to thank you all for electing me to my current position. You know, the World Zionist Congress is a political entity that Herzl left us with, and I'm the senior representative of Merkaz. It's the Masorti conservative slate to the Zionist Congress. So if you voted in the last elections, I'm your voice. So I'm trying to bring your voice into the national institutions. We'll talk today from a perspective that I wasn't in the same perspective for many years, talking with the Jewish communities around the world, because I'm in front of you today as a heavy-hearted Israeli who looks on the political arena in Israel and thinking to himself and thinking with you what should be done in this stage in order to make sure that the Zionist endeavor, that the state of Israel that we love so much, will go back to a path of sanity. Because in the last few weeks now, there is a reason that hundreds of thousands of Israelis are rallying in the streets and crying out loud for something to be fixed. Now, I'd like to start, with your permission, with the results of the last elections. Just 3 months ago, we had the 5th round of elections in Israel after a political instability that described the political situation in Israel for quite a few years. Now, it was a tico, a wash between the two sides of the political arena for a few rounds of elections. But in the last elections, we saw a majority to one side. It was a majority to the right and the extreme right and the Orthodox parties in a way that enabled them to convene for the first time in Israel's history, for the first time, a homogenic government. Because as you know, in the Knesset, we have 120 seats. In order to have a coalition in Israel, to have a government, you need to convene a coalition of at least 61. And they were able to put together a coalition of 64, which is, relatively speaking to Israel, could be a quite stable coalition. And for many of us, seeing that coalition was frightening. Not because we thought that it's not obvious that sometimes there will be a left-wing government and sometime right-wing government, but always with some kind of center parties to be part of that government. But because of the way that government was formed, and especially with some key elements of this government that no one would have ever thought that would be part of a legitimate government in Israel. And we'll take, for example, of course, a name that you heard, I'm sure, in the last few months, Itamar Ben-Gvir, the successor of Rabbi Kahana, a person that was convicted 8 times and was taken to court for 50 times. And most of the felonies that he was convicted for were felonies related to terror against Arabs. A politician that is racist and proud that he is racist. He is our Homeland Security today, Minister for Homeland Security today. This is something that wasn't easy to many of us to digest. Each one of us, made some decisions, to meet him, not to meet him. Many of us decided, well, even if he holds this prestige position, we will not engage with him. But still, that is a legitimate act of the one who put the coalition together to create a coalition that would support his government. I'm talking, of course, about Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who put this coalition together. As much as it was painful to see that some of the characters that were appointed to be ministers are not the ones that we are proud that they are ministers in the Israeli government, we thought, okay, it is legit. Then we saw the coalition agreements. The coalition agreements for themselves were another add-on on the government that was convened. And in the coalition agreements, we saw things that were never part of any coalition agreement regarding human rights, regarding activities in Judah and Samaria and the territories, regarding the Haredim, regarding things that are related to our own people, okay? The rights of converts that had a reform conversion or Masorti conservative conversion, regarding the law of return and a demand of one of the parties that was addressed in the coalition agreements that the law of return will be changed. We'll talk about it maybe a little later. Things about the Kotel, things about equality with drafting to the army. We saw many articles in the coalition agreements that were more than bothering. But still, we thought, well, coalition agreements are only coalition agreements. We know from the practicality of political life in Israel that sometimes, or even in many times, it's not that the entire coalition agreement is actually implemented when the government is starting working. So we were bothered. It is definitely something that we discussed dramatically, but it wasn't something that we felt that we could not cope with, okay? By the regular ways that we cope with things, from activism in the streets and rallying and doing things in the civil society, and of course, taking it to court when needed. And many times we took it to court and it was the right way to address things. But today we will not be talking about Jewish pluralism in Israel, and we will not be talking about the things that usually bothered us so dramatically because Israel didn't respect equally different streams in Judaism. Because what happened after the coalition was convened and the government was sworn in, that something that none of the political analyzers in Israel predicted. The plan that that government put as the first step before any other step that they did was to start legislating judicial reform that in many ways, and we'll talk about it in details in a few seconds, that in many ways changes the democratic soul of Israel, changes the rules of the games, the rule of the games that created Israel as a thriving democracy that it is. Now, what are the things that are discussed now? Firstly, we know that in Israel, there are not actual 3 agencies. In most democracies, there are 3 agencies: the government, the parliament, and the courts. In Israel, from the very beginning, one must admit, we had only 2 agencies because the government and the Knesset our parliament, are linked together. Anything that the government wants to legislate, the government can legislate. It means basically that we do not have 3 agencies, but 2 agencies. But still, these 2 agencies function quite well. The government governed, the parliament approved the legislations, and the court, when needed, had to intervene like any other court in any democratic country. And this is something that enabled the civil rights in Israel, not in the most not in the best way. And of course, each democracy has flaws, and Israel, of course, has its own flaws. But it enabled the Israeli society and the governments of Israel to create an open, democratic, dynamic, liberal democracy that allowed Israel to thrive. Now, there was a feel in this government and some right-wing governments before that the court is interfering too much, that the court doesn't allow the government to govern, to rule, which is quite a myth, because if you take the achievements of the governments of Israel over the years, from having a thriving economy and a strong academy, and going to wars when needed, signing peace when it's possible. So you see that the things that each and every government executed, and you understand, okay, it functioned quite well. It is maybe something else. And the judicial reform that is now put, and we'll start with the committee to appoint the judges. Okay, the judicial reform changes things that would stop the ability of Israel, this is our fear, to be Jewish and democratic in one sentence, Yehudit v'demokratit b'dibur echad. So what are we talking about? Firstly, the committee that elects judges. Up until now, the committee was from the 50s up until today. The committee was a committee of 9 people. In order to elect a judge, you need a majority of 7 people, meaning you have to create a quite impressive consensus, because the groups that are represented in this committee are 3 Supreme Court judges, 2 representatives of the Israeli bar, meaning lawyers from the Israeli bar, and the other 3 members from the coalition. So we had a good group of more than 3 of 9 people that together had to negotiate between themselves in order to elect good judges. And when you look at the Supreme Court today in Israel, the judges themselves, we have 15. You cannot be, you must be impressed by the quality, the caliber, their scholarly orientation, their background. You read their verdicts, and you understand that Israel rightly got, for many, many years, reviews from other Supreme Courts in the world that our Israeli Supreme Court is not only successful and defends human rights, but also a court that you can learn from. Actually, it's one of the, in my opinion, one of the jewels in Israel's democracy. Now, when you analyze the judges themselves today, you see that it's a myth that they are all liberals and progressives. 9 of them are conservative in small c. 3 of them live in the settlements. The percentage of settlers in the Israeli society is way less than the way that they are represented in our Supreme Court. So again, something that is a myth. We have a good Supreme Court, but it's not that it's not balanced in any way that is good enough. So you come to think of why to change the committee, why it's so important for the current government to have a different Supreme Court. Is it right that the new committee will be combined with a majority of coalition members that would basically dictate that in a few years, 1 or 2 years, because some judges are retiring, that in a few years, that the Supreme Court of Israel will be leaning not only towards the right wing, but also will be electing judges that would owe their appointment to the coalition and in our political atmosphere to the Prime Minister himself. Is it because the Prime Minister is now in court for 3 different accusations and basically he wants to elect his own judges because these will be the judges that will be dealing with his appeal? Could be. And this is something that is one of the key elements of the judicial reform, but it's not the only one. The second has to do with the parliamentary supremacy, the ability of the parliament to overrule a decision of the court. So if the court decides something, the parliament could legislate in a regular majority of 61 a different decision. And if the court cancels that decision, and according to the law now in Israel, it's possible, the parliament can do it again. And then the parliament has its own, the last words. Parliamentary supremacy is something that exists in several democracies, like in Canada. But the big difference that puts Israel in a different kind of category is that all the countries that parliamentary supremacy exists, A, it's not a regular majority, but a royal majority to some extent, and B, in those countries, there is either Bill of Rights that is protected or a constitution. In Israel, we don't have a constitution. Israel has the Declaration of Independence it's one of the royal documents that we have. It's definitely a document that I'm proud of, as many Israelis are proud of, but it's not a constitution. It's not something that the court can use to say, hey, this legislation is against the constitution. So it puts basically Israel judicial system in a way that is not anymore in the equation of the checks and balances that a democracy needs. The third element of the judicial reform has to do with the legal advisors. Up until now, each minister that is appointed by the prime minister and is elected in the Knesset, each minister has a legal advisor to work with. That legal advisor is loyal, of course, to the minister, but at the same time, he is loyal to the Attorney General of the State of Israel. So he needs to serve two entities, the minister and the law. The judicial reform asks to bring into implementation a different kind of paradigm, that the legal advisor of the minister would be an appointee of the minister in the same way that a client and a lawyer are creating their relationship. So the advisor would have to serve the minister in the same way, in the same ethics that a private lawyer represents the minister. He needs to represent the political desires, the political needs of the minister, regardless of what the law says. If you take these three elements together, you understand that what we are talking about here is not a judicial reform. It's a change of regime. It is taking Israel from being a liberal democracy, and as we know, the only way to be a true democracy is a liberal democracy, because otherwise you think that democracy is only going to the polls and electing by majority government. But we know that democracy is a set of values that are part of the democratic system. And the big fear of many of us, and I'm a devoted Zionist of a family of 10 generations. I love my country. I speak Hebrew. I even dream in Hebrew. I served in the army. My daughter is now in the army, an officer. My wife is a colonel in the army. It's really, we are part of the Israeli fabric. You cannot be more Zionist than we are, I think. But still, we feel that if, God forbid, this reform is legislated, Israel would cease to be a liberal democracy. And what happened to other countries just recently might happen to Israel. Hungary, Poland, Turkey. Some of them were great democracies. And in a short time, with a populistic leadership, they changed their nature. Yes, they still have elections, but elections is enough. We know that majority could be a tyrant as well. The tyranny of the majority is something that every democracy is looking for ways to limit. Because one of the elements is not to have, one of the elements of every democracy is not to have only a powerful government, but also more than one way to restrain the power of the government, because any government is so powerful. It's times in our history that, in my eyes, are like 48, like 73. 2023 is a year that might be a tipping point in the history of the State of Israel, because if, God forbid, in the 75th year of the State of Israel, we are ending the democratic chapter and starting a new era in our history, that would be something that would affect significantly the way Israeli society is put together, and and of course it would impact the relationship with world Jewry and other countries. For so many years, we were educating people that Israel is a thriving liberal democracy that shares values with other democracies, okay, with Canada, with the US, with Great Britain, with other countries. And secondly, that Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. How proud we were, how proud we are that Israel is that thriving democracy. God forbid if it ends. Was the Zionist endeavor worth it? Can we have a Jewish state that is not a democracy? You know, one can live in a democratic country that is not Jewish. Well, you live in a democratic country that is not Jewish, but can one really live in a Jewish state that is not a democracy? Sometimes I feel, that I'm staying without words, even to think about that moment. Well, we'll understand that the sun will be still in the skies, but Israel will not be the same place that we so proudly defended. I wake up sometimes in the last 2 months, many times at 2 a.m. I look to my right, I see my wife, she is awake too. We are thinking, good God, how can we make sure that this nightmare will stop? You see now, petitions of pilots, of elite unit fighters, of high-ranked officers, chief of staff, many of them, heads of Mossad, heads of Shin Bet. 99.9% of the people who did something for this country in serious positions are all in line, saying that this judicial reform would be a disastrous for Israel's democratic nature, as well as its economy, its academic stature, its ability to celebrate who we are, its ability to manifest the fact that this is the Israel that we love so much. In the last Motzai Shabbat, I was in Kaplan Street in Tel Aviv. Hundreds of thousands every Motzai Shabbat are there. This is the main demonstration, but in each and every town there is a demonstration. And I saw in the crowds, and a matured man, and I think today he's at his 90s. His name is Aryeh Naor, Professor Aryeh Naor. And I saw him, and my wife was standing next to me and said, is it really Aryeh Naor? Aryeh Naor was the secretary of the cabinet of Menachem Begin. And he is a devoted Jabotinsky guy, a person that came from the Betar ranks, a very strong, old-fashioned right-winger in Israel, the secretary of the cabinet of Menachem Begin. And he was standing there with many of us in the same street in Kaplan, and he was worried, as each and every one was. It means that the people that are now in the streets representing the fabric of the Israeli society in more than one dimension. It means that it's not the regular dispute between left and right. Many people from the right wing, at least from the old guards of the right wing, understand that this is a significant change that might serve the Haredi population. I'm not sure even about that, because one of the Supreme Court important decisions was to end the discrimination against Sephardi girls in a Haredi education system, but still the Haredim are pushing very hard for this reform. The Hardalim, it's the Haredim that are more into the national aspects of Jewish life in Israel, are also pushing for it. The extreme right wing is definitely there. But the motivation is not necessarily coming from there. I think that we are all in agreement, at least the people who are against this, even in the right-wing camp, that it needs to serve our democratically elected prime minister. Now, what can one do when the people of Israel elected democratically a government that represents the majority of the people who went to vote according to our system, and the fact that popular vote doesn't represent that there is that kind of majority of 64 seats. You know, the popular vote is the popular vote. You are very much experienced with the differences between the popular votes and the mandates, but still, we have it here, so it doesn't matter what the popular vote said. They have 64 seats in the Knesset. What can you do if this democratically elected government is legislating what they want to legislate? What is the ability of the minority to make a shift here, to move the needle? A dilemma, a strong dilemma. What is the things that the democratic country should allow a minority to do in order to make sure that things are not changed to its essence? So as you can imagine, it's an ongoing debate in Israel. I'd like to share with you my views about it, things that we do here, and things actually that I think that you can do also from your side of the ocean, because you not only can do, I think that you should do. So we are rallying in the streets. It's obvious. We are writing things. We are pushing the envelope. Sometimes in activism, you need to push the envelope. For many years, I did it in the Kotel, fighting for the right of having an egalitarian minyan in the Kotel. And this is something that sometimes you push the envelope in a way that is not violence, of course, in a way that it's still activism, but severe activism. Okay. But so this is something that we'll do here in Israel. But what else can be done? I think that's way more than legit to engage, and this is what I'm doing now. I think to engage the world Jewry with helping the state of Israel to come back to its way. Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people. Israel, and I was educated from day one in my kindergarten that Israel doesn't belong only to the Israelis, but belongs to the Jewish people at large. It's the nation state of the Jewish people. So yes, you cannot vote to our Knesset, but you should definitely have a voice. You do have a voice. So we need you to be engaged with being part of this discourse in Israel, because it matters. What can you do? Write and speak. Write to your friends and neighbors. Write to your friends in Israel or relatives in Israel. Make sure that they hear you and you hear them. Very important. Write to your Jewish newspaper, an op-ed, a letter. Make sure that you are heard. Secondly, your federations. The JFNA, the Jewish Federations of North America, issued last week an unprecedented letter. And they wrote it also because they got a push from their constituency, from different federations, people, donors for the federations from different levels that said, hey, this is something that you need to speak up. The letter that they sent was loud and clear and firm, and called Israel to take into consideration the ramification of that judicial reform that is not legislated in a consensus. Our own movement, conservative movement worldwide, issued a statement that we never issued before. Communities from Latin America, from North America, from Europe, all joined together in a very firm statement that called to freeze the legislation and to come under the auspice of the President of Israel to negotiate a reasonable solution for the tension. So pushing within your communities, and especially via federations, we think that it's a very powerful kind of tool. Thirdly, I'd like to speak about charity. Some federations are doing it, I know already, but I think that individually, some of you are also sometimes, donating to good causes in Israel. I think that should be revisited in a creative way. Israel has a strong economy. Israel can build its own hospitals and invest in our roads or recreation parks. What Israel needs now more than anything else, and this is something that won't come from the government, is a strong civil society to promote organizations that are doing that are promoting humanism in Israel and democracy in Israel and Jewish pluralism in Israel. This is something that is needed more than ever before. Of course, my favorite is the Masorti Movement, so I encourage you to do it as the first thing. But there are other organizations as well. It's so important. A strong civil society is something that saves Israel now. The ones who are organizing the rallies in the street, it's NGOs from different places, from different aspects that are putting together a big cry outlet that we hear it now. The fourth thing that I'd like to touch is something that I'd like to say it very delicately, and I'll do it in a way that I'll be as cautious as I can. For so many years, we were taught and trained by AIPAC that political influence is important, and the way that to work politics is to put pressure when needed. And you did it so brilliantly. I'm talking now via AIPAC, not via AIPAC. The American jury knew how to make sure that your politicians, senators and congressmen know that Israel matters for you, that you care for Israel. Now, I think it's a time to do it in a vice versa way, to engage with politicians that you know that care for Israel, that love Israel, not the others. Okay, the ones that you know that care for Israel, and to ask them, to engage with them, hey, this time, we need you to reach out to your Israeli peers, to the people that you are in touch with in the Israeli establishment, in the Israeli political arena, and tell them how worried you are for the democratic nature of the state of Israel. It's something that I say very cautiously. I know that it is sloping, how do you say, sloping slope? I'm not sure that it's the right way to say it. Midron chalaklak in Hebrew. I know that it's not something that you do lightly, but we are in unprecedented times. It's not business as usual. I wouldn't ask you to do such a thing for the kotel or for conversion or for other things that are important. There are core values, but it's kind of business as usual, because we fight it and slowly we are getting there. If, God forbid, this regime change is legislated, Israel will be a different place. So we need to use different ways of activism that we didn't do before. Now, before I stop and give you some open for discussion, I'd like to say a few words about what happened yesterday. After the terror attack that we had with two brothers were shot dead in Hawara. A terror attack that is as evil as it could be, and we are all mourning for those two brothers. We had an incident in Hawara that one cannot call it differently than a pogrom. 200 to 300 young settlers came to Hawara to revenge, and burned dozens of houses, and burned dozens of cars, and killed one person and harmed many people there. The place was burning. The kfar, the village, was burning. There were people standing there after they burned the village and prayed Arvit, and put a live Facebook for them praying Arvit next to a burning village that they did. Now, terror, that we are attacked and our people are dead because of terror, this is the worst thing that can happen. It's so painful. We are experiencing terror in Israel for decades, and we know how painful it is. But something like we saw yesterday, is something that it's new to what Zionism is. And it's not by coincidence that in this government, where the Minister for Homeland Security was the one to defend the people that were accused in such things, okay, is now the Homeland Security. It's not by coincidence that this mob was able to do what they did. This is the spirit that comes from the government. And it tells you in a nutshell, how could Israel look like if, God forbid, this kind of insanity is not being brought back into a civil way that one can live with. we are now in a vicious cycle. Today we had another person killed, an American, Israeli-American young man of 27 who made Aliyah and served the army and then went back to the U.S. He came here on vacation, and yesterday in Yericho he was shot dead, and then will be another revenge. We are now in a place where we have a constitutional democratic challenge with a security escalation that might lead us to another intifada. And these two elements might take Israel to a place to rebuild it again. It will be a different kind of ballgame. So I wish I could, in this moment of our history, to be more upbeat and to give you a good feel about Israel and Zionism, something that I did for so many years gladly and proudly, because I was criticizing, but at the same time, I knew how to bring the message that we are celebrating the fabric of what Israel is because of its diversity. But we are now in a point where we need to say, hey, we need to rethink what should be the right activism in this moment. And as a devoted Zionist who wants you to be proud of Israel, I'm engaging you with helping Israel to be Jewish and democratic and Jewish, b'dibur echad. I will stop here and let's.
Thank you, Dr. Hess, very, very much. A really extraordinary overview and insight into a challenging, difficult moment. And I feel like to ask about anything other than the loss of life is probably runs the risk of diluting that. But I do want to turn to your expertise with regard to Israeli parliamentary democracy and just ask, is there any wisdom developing about a potential compromise here? Is there room for that? Is there time for that? A sense that, at least from the diaspora, your prime minister being master at the game, is he seeking something other than the most radical versions of these reforms? And is there any developing sense that something other than that will be the outcome of it, and how would that wind up looking?
So it's a wonderful question, and I can only try to analyze it. Of course, it's more of a guess than anything else. There are some attempts to create a compromise. The president of Israel, President Herzog, is working tirelessly to find a common ground for a compromise. The government says, of course, we are willing to talk. Let's talk, and of course that we will compromise at the end. This is what they say, but they would not freeze the legislation. So each and every day they legislate in the Committee for Constitution, they legislate another article that will be brought to the plenum. And the fact that they do not stop it means the opposition analyzes it, and I think rightly, that the government is not serious. They are not really seeking to do a compromise. So this is from another angle, from one angle. From the other angle, I must say that there is an internal dispute within the protesters whether it's good or bad to negotiate with this current government. It's as if we are negotiating the length of that we're negotiating the way that Israel's democracy will be executed. So does it really matter if it will be this way or another way? The principles that they are so eager to change are core elements of a democracy. So can you really negotiate on them without a constitution? It's a true debate, and I'd like to hope that at the end of the day, some kind of a compromise that everyone can live with and still keeps the core elements of a democracy will be in action. I'm not sure that we are close to it or that we will achieve it. It might be that Israel would go into a phase of anarchy, God forbid, before it happens. Because if, let's assume that this legislation is legislated, and the court says that it's illegal, and then it's something that never happened in Israel. The chief of police, whom should he hear? Whom should he take orders from? The Supreme Court or from the Minister for Homeland Security? Now, this is a question that I'm sure that the chief of the police is thinking with himself these days, because he understands it might get to it. And how would the IDF operate? The Tzahal. If today there is an escalation in the Gaza border or in Judah and Samaria, and the reserves are called to a campaign, what would happen if people will not come? If the reserve will say, listen, to this so extreme government, I cannot come. You broke the very basic contract of a citizen with his country, because it came to a point where I cannot say that you analyzed everything before calling me to risk my life. Now, you hear what some elite units are already writing in public letters, and you understand that we are as close as it could be to that moment in our history. So I cannot tell you how it would develop. I do know that if we are bringing more and more people to the streets each and every week, it will come to a point where even the extreme elements of the government would understand that you cannot impose a new set of values of an open on an open society that doesn't want these values. And you can compare it to other places where there was a change of regime. There was, unfortunately, a vast majority in the society who wanted that change. In Hungary, Orban was elected in a vast majority. He didn't need a coalition. He had that big of a big party to legislate whatever he wanted. So he changed Hungary, but he had enough approval rate in the Hungarian street to do so. In Israel, they simply don't have it. So imposing it might bring us to a clash that I want to hope that there will not be a bloodshed. We'll do everything that there will not be bloodshed, but am I certain that we will not have that? Unfortunately, I cannot say it.
So picking up on that, another couple of questions we received in the chat had to do with, how this, what are the chances that this government would fall? And even if this government did fall, do you think the election results might be different than the previous 5 elections that have been through? Have things shifted in society that might shift that balance?
So the polls that came out in the last few days show that there is a shift to the center and to the center left, but it's only polls. And, according to the polls, the center left won many times in elections until the day of the elections. So we never know. The polls from that angle, I think that the polls show that a good chunk of people who voted for Likud never realized that would be the change. Okay, they love Bibi, they think that the right wing should have a government, but many of them, not the majority of them, but many of them think that it's too much. Having said that, the fact that the polls are not complementing the coalition works usually the opposite, meaning it makes the coalition stronger, not weaker, because they understand that they might lost the street. So they are working better. Usually, what happened in the last 2 days in the coalition actually tells you that it's a little more shivering. Ben Gvir's party didn't come to one of the votes in the Knesset because they thought that what IDF is doing with the Arabs is not strong enough. So they demonstrated against the prime minister in a way that not showing up to a vote, it's quite a drama. And there were a few others things in the coalition that might tell you that it's breaking. But I'm not sure. I think that we are not as close as I would have hoped to a new election.
Yizhar, from your perspective and Perch, what is the sort of content and nature and any surprise about participants in these massive protests? And also, perhaps a related question, has there been any kind of deep soul-searching type of national reaction to Hawara, or is it sort of like that's those crazies at it again, they don't represent us, and so we're not going to raise our voices against that as well? Have they in any way coalesced? And any insight you could share both on the protesters and national reaction to what you correctly referred to as or you or Rabbi Peltz referred to as a pogrom?
So for your first question, what is stunning in this wave of activism is the fact that many groups join together. You can see groups from different agendas. You can see a very core-devoted lefty groups standing right next to people who are coming from different walks of life. And when you go through the Kaplan Street in Tel Aviv, you can see the different groups. Okay, they gather together in a way, but it's important for everyone to make sure that we are coordinating it nicely. The Masorti movement, the Reform movement, the academia people, the people who are coexisting organizations that are working together. It's impressive. When it comes to your second question, what did the Hawara incident of yesterday, the pogrom, what did it do to the Israeli society at large? I think I saw two things. One, there was an initiative that just started 24 hours ago of someone who put together a new fund to raise money from Israelis to repair the damage. And within 12 hours, he raised more than 1 million shekels. And for me, it was impressive. You know, I of course, I donated and I was proudly did it. And I saw that many others did it. I got a WhatsApp yesterday night from a friend of mine who is the center of the center. He's a lawyer who works in Tel Aviv. You know, he's not to the right, not to the left, not to the... And he told me, listen, I just gave them 5,000 shekels. It's so important to me that the people of Hawara understand that the evil of terror that some of their people did to some of our people doesn't mean that we need to demolish that their village, because this is not we know it from our text that this is something that you don't do. You convict people who did felonies. You know, people who did nothing, it's not right to do anything to them. And so this is encouraging. I also saw some posts of from the settlers movement that condemned it dramatically, and it encouraged me. I did not see, and definitely not in the right way, from the Minister of Homeland Security and other key elements of the government that condemned it in the way that they should have. Prime Minister Netanyahu did condemn it, and rightly, he should have done it, and he did it. Some ministers did it many hours after it happened, and since it's people who defended those in previous accidents, they defended it, so no one took it seriously.
I want to switch gears a little bit to religious pluralism, which is an issue that we've talked about a lot in the past. And I noticed that today the Supreme Court in Israel is holding the first hearing in 2 years, I think, on the Western Wall compromise and its implementation or lack thereof. And I'm just curious, at one point the coalition submitted a bill, or perhaps Shas submitted a bill that was pulled very quickly about things happening at the Kotel, and could talk a little bit about some of those religious pluralism issues and where those are right now.
Yeah. So I opened this morning, now it's 8:30 in Israel almost. I opened this morning in the Supreme Court. We had a hearing in Bagatz in a case that the Supreme Court is dealing with for almost 20 years regarding the Kotel. It's a petition of many people. There were about 20 lawyers from the different files there. One cannot tell. It was not a regular discussion of the Supreme Court. It's in expanded Beit Din. There were 7 judges sitting together, and the head of the court was the President Chayut, the president of the Supreme Court. They didn't give any verdict, and they will be writing it and sending it, and I'm sure it won't be Sof Pasuk. It's another chapter. I was encouraged to see that the government that was represented there by the Ministry of Justice did say that they are working towards implementing the physical parts of the Kotel agreement, meaning that they didn't cancel it totally. The court was pushing very strongly the municipality of Jerusalem to see that indeed they are giving the right approval for the physical parts there to be implemented. But again, you know, as much as it's important, the Kotel at this stage, I feel that it becomes number 10 on our list when we have this big tsunami coming towards us with the judicial reform. A few months ago, I thought, well, it won't be the Kotel, it would be the law of return, because the attempt to change the law of return is a big drama in what is Zionism. They want to, I'll put in parentheses, they want to cancel the grandfather clause, because today you get eligibility to make aliyah if one of your grandfathers or grandmothers is Jewish. And this is the way from the 50s, when it was legislated up until today, that people could make aliyah, but it didn't only affect the people who wanted to make aliyah, but basically, although no one thought that it would happen, but basically it defined, for the last few decades, it defined the boundaries of the Jewish collective. Because the way that people were engaged in programs, from birthright to Masa to other programs, were under the same criteria of the law of return. And what we see now by statistics in North America, and it's encouraging, that way more grandchildren of Jewish grandparents, even if they were not connected to their Jewish heritage, came on birthright, and from that moment on, identified themselves as Jews. And we saw a big change in the statistics in the last 20 years. So what is Israel is saying here, basically, to them, if God forbid they would change the law of return, that from now on, oh no, we are pushing you aside. Are we as Jews rich enough in numbers to push aside Jews from our families and collective boundaries? Absurd that is against Zionism in a profound way. I'd like to hope that that thing will not be changed. But again, even that change is now not on the top of our list. The main thing is to block the attempt to change the nature and to take the soul of our beloved Zionist endeavor.
Yizhar, we know you have to go at 1:30 our time, but one last question, actually from the chat, a parent of someone who just invested to send a high schooler to Israel and also is sending them back, as we are, for a high school program this summer. You mentioned effect on diaspora communities. That's going to affect everything from support to travel to doubt, et cetera. But what should parents be telling their kids who they're sending to Israel about this, if anything? What advice can you share?
Well, on that, I'd like to be really firm and positive. I think that one of the things that are definitely important is that all of us will not lose our ties from both sides of the ocean. Okay, I just met this week a group, if I'm not mistaken, also from New Jersey, I'm not sure, that is now in a mission in Israel, and it was a pleasure visiting Israel as adults and as children, teens. It is something that definitely, at this stage, for sure, it's something that is not harmed, and it's something that is engaging. And I think that being in Israel in these hectic times, it adds another dimension for your responsibility as a Jew. And I know that all teen programs that are now in Israel are engaged in the discourse. Some of them are being even taken on Motzei Shabbat to the demonstrations, and we have demonstrations in each and every place in Israel, and it is a good lesson of Jewish activism, and you are engaging in fixing something that is wrong, and you cannot think of a more Jewish thing to do. So I would definitely encourage continuing all programming. It is something that we should invest more in, even. It is so important.
On that, I want to thank you very much, Dr. Hess, for spending the time with us today. As always, incredible to hear from and learn from you. You're championing everything from religious pluralism to human rights to these issues that are so of such deep concern to so many, are unparalleled, and we appreciate the time very much. I want to thank my colleagues in the clergy who are on the call as well, lay leadership from both TBS and from Bethel who are on here, and to, again, over 100 participants who've shown up at this noon hour to leave better informed because of you and your observation, wisdom, and work. I'd like to remind everyone really briefly that Jewish kryptonite is not anti-Semitism, Jewish kryptonite is apathy. And it's the same for our Zionist commitments as well. The worst thing that could happen would be for us to turn away and say, God forbid, that it's somebody else's problem or that this is an internal Israeli issue. As Rabbi Peltz opened with, I'll also close with, these are also our concerns. Yizhar, we're with you in support and praying that things will turn out positively, even more positively perhaps than can currently be viewed across the near-term horizon. So I know that you have partners, friends here, and we look forward to seeing you in Israel. We look forward to seeing you back in our communities, and we encourage everybody to remain informed, active in a way that's meaningful to you. And one great way to start doing that is to sign up at the link that was put in the chat a couple of times, but also to remain engaged. And we know that this group certainly will. Yizhar, thank you very much. Thank you very much. We'll see you soon.
Bye-bye.